On my Minn Kota 36 volt, my steering housing is starting to grind, and when I have it in autopilot, sometimes it doesn't want to turn right, so it just keeps ticking me to the left. So I picked up a new steering housing. It was pretty cheap. It was only like 120 bucks, and I know that seems really expensive, but it's really not too bad. There's gonna be quite a few steps we got to do to get this off of here. We got to take these side pieces off. We have to come up to our head unit. We have to take the whole head unit off because we have to slide this shaft out of the motor housing itself. There's wires you have to unhook under here. I did watch a couple of YouTube videos on it, and the one guy just kind of fast forwarded through everything. So I'm gonna try to make an in-depth video, and anybody else has this problem, they can figure it out. So, all right, so the first step, most important step that you want to do is you want to disconnect power to your motor. You're going to be working with electrical connections down here that go to the steering housing and up here in the head unit itself. So make sure you disconnect all power. The next step you want to do is there's two number 3 Phillips head screws on each side. You're going to take this side plate off. There's one here and one here. So we'll get those screws off. We'll pull the side panels off. And that will expose the nuts that we need to actually get the housing off when we get to it. So we're gonna get these screws off here. This just pops off, and now all your wires for your head unit do come through here. So I want to just kind of hang right there, and there's the pin that we will need later on to get to when we get to that step. This cover pops right off. Simple as that. Those bolts over there so we don't lose them. Next thing to do, we're going to switch to a number 2 Phillips head. And there's 4 bolts in the head unit underneath. Let's see if you can see that. 4. That will pop the top of this head unit off, exposing all the wires, because we're going to have to disconnect some things in the head unit in order to pull this whole shaft out of this steering housing. All right, shine a little light on here. So there's the 4 screw holes. You want to make sure you do not lose these screws. Set everything off to the side. That one's really in there. All right. Alright, I'm gonna need a longer bit to get into those two. Alright, so I got all the screws out of there, and this cover comes off the head, just pops right off. You can look in there. Nobody has ever been in this head unit before. Everything is still exactly where it's supposed to be. All the little clips for the wires are still in there, which is surprising. I mean, this motor is a 2011, so I mean, she's seen some use. I got it from a guy that fished Lake Ontario, so yeah, everything's exactly where it's still from the factory. So the next step, what we're gonna do is we're gonna unhook the wire for the transducer. I'm gonna take the wire of all these clips. I'm gonna take a picture on my phone to remember exactly where they went. We'll have to unhook these power wires. This blue tube, you just basically slides off. And then here is this brown wire right here, has an inline fuse on it, and there's these quick clips on each side. Let's see if I can get this one off here to show you. There's these quick clips on each side that are shrink tubed in, and you will want to shrink tube these back in. Keep them watertight, you know, so no water gets in there. So you need, I don't know, probably 1.5 to 2-inch piece of 1/4-inch shrink tubing. So we're gonna go ahead and get all this taken apart, and then we'll be able to take this whole head unit off, take the screw out on the back side, pull the whole head unit off, and then we'll be ready to pull the shaft down through the steering housing. Alright, so the first thing we're gonna do is take these little screws out of these wire clips. I'm just gonna leave these wire clips where they are so I can roughly get it back to where it's supposed to go. And this is the wire for the transducer that's in the bottom of the unit itself. These pieces just unscrew, and then they just pull apart. These red ones here, I'm gonna have to move that one. It's like a little insulator piece, and then there's just these clips. They a little wiggling back and forth. They just pop off. I'm gonna pull these sleeves off. These little insulator sleeves, just so I don't have to pull those through down through the shaft itself, and then when I got to put everything back up through, they get in the way. I really remember to put them back on. When we put everything back together. All right, so there's those two. And the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to cut this shrink tubing on the lower side, so that way when we have to pull all these wires through down the shaft, and then we have to put it through the housing down there, we don't have to try to pull this fuse. There's an inline fuse here, so we don't have to try to pull that through. So when you're cutting this shrink tubing, you want to be very careful. You do not cut any wires, or you are going to have a headache on your hands. And like I said, you will want to redo the shrink tubing when you put everything back together. So have a piece on standby. It's a little tedious trying not to cut through to the wire. Alright. These pieces should just come apart. There we go. Pull the rest of this, cut the rest of this tubing off. I'm just so surprised Like I said, this motor's a 2011 and this head unit's never been taken apart. So this is still the original steering housing. Right. So pop this out, because this all has to come down through the shaft. All of these wires here have to go down through the shaft. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our drill. We're going to take this screw out, which goes through the shaft to hold the head unit onto, holds the head unit onto the shaft itself. Right, and then just a little twisting. The head unit should come right off. Hopefully, that's the plan. Yep, here it comes. And then there's all the wires that we undid. So feed those down through. All right, and the head unit is off. Now it's obviously still connected to the wires that are down there, so just gonna want to lay that to the side. We want to get this collar off the shaft because obviously we can't pull this down through. You just loosen that and that slides right off. All right, so we are pretty much ready to take the whole shaft out of the head unit or the steering housing itself. So what we're going to do, we're going to depress the pedal, which unlocks the feet down here. And we're just gonna slide this whole shaft right out and pull the wires and everything right through, hopefully. And there we go. We just pulled the whole shaft right out of the steering housing. We'll just set that to the side. We don't want to, be careful, you don't want to break your prop. All right, so now we're left with the housing itself. Then there's a couple steps we got to do to get that out of there, and we'll get to that next. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to disconnect the steering housing from everything up here itself so we can take it out. So we do have this power cord that goes down into here, and basically what you're going to do is there's just these little plastic pins that lock in on each side. Basically you're just going to squeeze it and the whole thing pops right out. Now there's like a motherboard in here and some bunch of wires, you know, for the battery indicator and all that such. Basically the only two things you're going to have to disconnect is going to be these two wires right here, which power the steering housing itself. So, and then there's a grommet, like a plastic grommet that holds the wire into this housing right here. Now this plastic grommet should just pop right out of there, but you need to be careful. If you're going to reuse this on the new one, you need to be careful not to break it when you take it off the wire. They are pinched on there very tight. It is super tight. And I'll show you that when we get it out of there. I did not buy another one, so we're gonna hope that I don't break this one. So let's get to taking that out of there. The lighting in my garage is not the greatest. So there's these two wires right there, as you can see, and they should just pull apart. I need two hands. Yep, pulls apart. Now our this grommet should just pop out of here. We'll see. Ooh, that didn't sound good. Might need a screwdriver to try to pry it out of there. Alright, and that doesn't want to come out of there, so I'm gonna move the camera out of the way and get back to you guys when I get it off. Alright, well that was an absolute pain in the rear. That literally took me probably a good 5-10 minutes to get that off using 2 screwdrivers, prying, the whole 9 yards. I'm surprised I did not break it from what it looks like. I honestly would suggest just buying a new one, because you are probably going to break it. But that grommet sticks screwdrivers in this side, and so I get better lighting, and popped it out. Look at how tight that grommet was on that wire. That is insanely tight, like super tight. Hey, it's off, and it looks like I'm going to be able to reuse it. So, that's a plus. So the next thing we want to do, now that that is off, we need to get this pin out that holds the housing in. So, you can see when we depress the pedal, how we get an extra gap there. So I need to find something, maybe this tool bag, something that I can set on the pedal to depress it that's actually gonna stay. See if this, I'm sure will do it. Nope, I need something heavier than that. Anyways, there's a lock washer on this shaft down here that we have to get off. It holds the shaft in. Basically, just gonna use a screwdriver and just keep prying it all around until you work it off. Might need 2 screwdrivers for this. Just make sure you be careful. If you happen to damage or something, they're not that expensive. You can get them at the hardware store. So we're gonna get this grommet off of here, and then we'll get to it when we can pull the whole shaft out and get the steering housing off. All right, finally, after 25 minutes of messing around, we got the grommet off the wire. That was a pain. This lock washer that's on this shaft was sitting right there. I used screwdrivers to pry it out. I'm sure there's a special tool, but I just don't have it. These screwdrivers to pry it out, and it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I got it out. So the lock washer's off. We're ready to push the shaft through that holds the steering housing in. So let's see if we can just kind of push it through. See what we got here. Nope, we're gonna need to use some force. As I expected. Alright, it's moving. Something's working right. Everything I watched said this would be the hardest part, is that grommet and that washer. And now I believe it. I highly suggest just getting a new grommet and a new washer. So tap it out so we don't make any burrs. There it is. It is out. Finally. Out. Finally. We have achieved success. Shaft is out. Okay, so we're just gonna lay that there. I'm going to apply some lubricant to that when we put the new one in. And in theory, cross our fingers, should just pop right out of there. And there's the old unit. You can see by how much rust is on under there. I can only imagine what the inside of this looks like. So that is out finally. There are a few things that you need to put onto the new one. I'm gonna show you guys that here in a second. All right, here's the new unit, here's the old unit. First thing, this grommet, we want to put it back in the same exact spot as it was on the other one. So I'm gonna match these wires up down here on the end. Put this grommet on. Make sure you put it the right way. This big flat collar piece needs to go this way, as the wire is going to feed back down in here. I felt it move a little. Put it in the same spot. You might need some pliers to put that sucker on there. That thing is tight. Good knit. Oh yeah, we're gonna need some pliers. All right, let's see what we got. I have to run to the back and grab some pliers real quick. All right, let's try this again. Match them up. Let's see, right about there. Hopefully I do not break this. All right, I believe it is on there. Honestly, I probably should get a new one. It's a little mangled up from when I was taking it off, but it's on there. Pretty darn close to the same exact spot. And it's not moving. Okay, so the other things that you will need to take out of your old one are these rubber bushings. They're on the pivot point of where this goes up and down, and they're super easy to take out. Take them out of the old one, pop them in a new one, and that's it. That's all you're gonna need out of the old ones: the grommet on the wire and these two bushings. So we are ready to reassemble everything back. All that just for that. So get back up to the boat and just get everything back together. All right, so we're just gonna put everything back together. Set this down in here. Just try to get it lined up. Oh, the shaft comes through this side. Forgot one thing. Forgot to put some lubricant on this. Alright. A little bit of grease on there. Try to get this line back up. Sometimes it'd be nice to have an extra set of hands. Right there. Alright, we're gonna need that hammer. Line it up on the other side. Right, it is in. Now we need to reapply this lock washer onto the shaft. Okay, got it started. We're going to take some vice grips to hold this shaft so it doesn't come out as we're hitting that washer on from the other side. That. Alright. Use a deep well socket. Some might just barely make it. 10 millimeter, infamous 10 millimeters. Nowhere to be seen in my garage. Imagine that. So use this deep well socket. Hammer this washer back on there. Flush, and I'm just going to tap this shaft from the other side to make sure it's tight. Give this another tap. Make sure there's no, we want to get as tight as possible. There's no gap and no play. And it is, she is on there. It's a little This little extension that I'm using as a punch because I can't find my other punch. Just make sure, and there's no gap. Awesome. So, take these off. Maybe. This is being more of a pain than I thought it to be. But it's worth doing it yourself versus taking it to a dealer and paying a couple $100 for somebody to do it. There we go. Okay. Do that. Okay. All right. So now we can depress that pedal because we're done using all of that. Make sure. Yep, still works. Okay. All right, so the next thing we want to do, we got that wire and the grommet pop back in there. We need to reconnect these wires. So we're gonna go white to white and black to black. And these just pop in here. Make sure you hear the click. It should be in there. In there. All right, they are together. So we're gonna take this, push all these wires back down in here. Why does it not want to go in there? All right. All right, that's locked in. Cool. So the next thing we need to do is to re-put the shaft. We need to re-put the shaft back through the steering housing. We're gonna feed the wires and everything back up through there. Should get a little better lighting. There we go. Just be careful because this is heavy. You do not want to drop it. And I cannot see what's going on. Okay. We might need to tape these wires together. The two power wires are getting stuck. There is a little lip in there, and you do not want these scraping up in there. So let's get some tape. Tape those power wires. Just gonna take some electrical tape. tape these power wires to the other ones. It doesn't have to be fancy. It's just you're taking it right back off after you get everything up through. So just enough to hold everything there, cover up these ends from scraping, getting snagged up in there. Alright, should be able to feed that through there. 60-inch shaft by yourself, kind of a pain. I would not want to do this on a 72 by myself. There we go. And we're through. That was a little difficult and it's locked. Okay. Almost done down here. All we have to do now is to screw these side panels back on. Everything else is done down here, and the rest of the work will just be done putting the head unit back on up top. So we'll get these screwed back on and I'll get back to you guys when we're up at the head unit. All right, so after about hour and a half intermission, I had some other things I needed to do. Realized that all the shrink tube I had was too big for the wire we're going to be using. So I went and picked up this kit at my local Walmart. It's got a whole bunch of shrink tubing sizes, so I'll be covered for a long while. So we're going to get back to putting this head unit back onto the motor shaft itself. Let's see if I can get a little bit better angle. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we want to make sure we put this collar back on. You make sure you put it on the right way. You know, there's that slit here where it meets on the steering housing down there. Because you do not want to forget to put that back on, get everything back together, and then crap, gotta take everything back apart. So there's that. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take the head unit itself, kind of stretch this back up. We're gonna stick the wires back through this hole so we can get them all fished back up into here before we put the screw back through. All right, see if we can fish these through here. Can't even tell which one's caught. So on the back there's a little notch where it's going to slide into the unit just like that. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the screw back into the head unit and get it screwed back to the post. You might have to wiggle it a little bit to find the hole that goes through the shaft. And there's a nut. That's why. There's a nut on the back side. And it actually fell out. Like a locking nut on the back side. And it actually fell out. Nope. So I'm going to have to get in there and try to Get this nut back out. And figure it out. Alright, so now that we got the screw back in there, the head is secured back, we are going to start connecting these wires back. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my phone of the picture I took of the way everything was laid in there. That way I know exactly where each of these little wing clips get mounted. So that one, find my screws here. This one for the transducer going up here. Now, I don't know if it's super important to put these back in. A couple of the other videos I've seen, you guys did not have them, but they're here. I have them. I might as well put them back in. Keep everything a little organized. Doesn't have to be super tight. And I'm gonna stick this two ends back together for the transducer. There is pins in there, so you do have to line the pins back up. Don't just ram it in there, then you won't have function use of the transducer that's down in there. So this one went here, that went there, that's set like that. The next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take care of the soldering part. So I have my piece of shrink tubing, this brown wire and this inline fuse. There's this quick clip. So what we have to do is feed this shrink tubing through here. Connect these two wires back together. I'm going to pull the shrink tubing back over these two. This one's a little snug. I'm going to come back from the other way. So I'm going to go There we go. Real low heat. With the wires. All right, so I got that heat shrink back on that wire, let it cool down. Got it pinched back in here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put these blue insulator sleeves back on the wire. Very important. So the first one I'm going to do is the red. Let's slide this down this wire. Red to red. Slide this sleeve back up over the connector. And this isn't a heat shrink, it's just like a insulator sleeve of some sort. And check my phone, see exactly how that was up in there. Okay, so this was laid down in here like this. I'm going to switch it around. screw in there. Come on. There we go. That's in there. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is we're gonna slide this insulator sleeve back onto the black wire. Go black to black. Put that back on there. Make sure it's in there tight. Slide the insulator sleeve back up. That out of the way. To move this down. Sometimes things just never want to go back the way they came out. Alright, last screw. Make sure I don't pinch any other wires. Okay. Now that's in there, everything's in there the way it's supposed to be. We're going to tuck this in there, slide this head back on there. Come on. It should fit down in there flush. If it doesn't, then there's something in the way, something. It's fitting flush on the front, but not on the back. Not sure exactly why. Alright, Houston, we found the problem. Not paying attention to my diagram. There's 2 screw holes there. I had those clips for the wires in the wrong holes on the top and bottom, which was not allowing these little posts in the lid to seat where they need to be seated. Alright, so it's on there flush. Gonna hold it. I get my screws started here in the bottom. I could see why some people would take this to a shop just for saving the headache, to be honest with you. It wasn't really that hard. Just some of the, like, trying to heat shrink that wire back without melting the other wires. Everything's so close in there, there's no room for error. There's no slack in those lines whatsoever. You could see that could be a pain. So the last couple of screws in. All right, and one more. All right, it's on. Okay, everything's back together. The sides are back on. The sides are back on. The housing is on. Everything's put back. The head unit is put back together. It's installed. That's back on. Don't see any extra parts on the ground, so that's a bonus. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to drop the motor down. Careful not to hit my garage door, like I've done many times. Locks in, locks in. We're going to re-plug this in and give it power, hopefully. Oh, we have power. We have power. We've done something right. Going to take our Our new remote, I had to replace this remote. The other one, the back where the battery goes, was all chewed up. So when I tried to replace the battery, the previous owner that had it before me must have done the same thing and stripped it out. So I had to buy a new remote, and it was not cheap. I'm not gonna lie, it was probably $120 just for this remote. Super easy to relearn it to the remote. It literally took me less than 10 seconds. But here we go. Turn the remote on. We're gonna turn it. Turns, and it sounds so much better than the old one. Let's see if we have power to the blade. We'll just go like a half speed, and it's turning. So that means we have done everything correct. She's back up and running. It sounds so good. Got a little click in there. So resolve that click. One of these days I might have to take it apart and make sure that everything's good in there. Put a little grease in there. So we did it. We replaced the steering housing on a 36 volt Minn Kota Tarova. It was a little tedious at times. Like I said, the heat shrink, something that I would have done differently. To be honest, probably would have taken the motor off of my boat. I didn't even think about it until halfway through and everything was already torn apart. Probably would have taken the motor off of my boat. Probably would have bought that new grommet and probably a new little lock washer down on the bottom. But other than that, everything was pretty simple. So it works. It sounds 10 times better than the old one did. The other one, it was time to go. So I think we'll get her out on the water tonight and see what we can do and make sure everything's running well. We were out last night. Unfortunately, I forgot my camera, and we caught some pretty good fish. We caught a 28 3/4 inch 9-pound walleye, a 25 1/2 inch 5-pound, and then a 22. So we'll bring the camera along tonight, see what happens. Hopefully we can make another video soon. So until then, tight lines everybody. We'll see you later.